Welcome, sir.
Welcome.
Welcome everybody, and good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon to everybody. So it's on time. This is 1:58. So this is very on time. And welcome, Sir Professor Debashish Das, our Honorable Registrar of Calcutta University, and I welcome everybody here. And Dr. Ambedkar Chair Professor Subroto Shankar Bakchi is here, and also all of our faculty members are here. And we have been very much lucky to have with us to deliver the lecture Professor Nirmal Kanti Chakraborty, Vice Chancellor NUJS, National University of Juridical Sciences, West Bengal National Juridical Sciences, will be delivering the Dr. Ambedkar chair. So before I will ask our registrar to say something about. Am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Am I audible? Can you help? I do not know. The screen has out from me anyway. If it is audible, that's fine. So I would like to give some just a introductory note about the Dr. B.R. Ambedkar chair here in University of Calcutta, and the detail will be delivered by Professor Subroto Shankar Chakraborty, now Dr. Ambedkar chair professor in anthropology. So this is founded in 1996, and the Professor Buddhadev Chaudhary served as Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Chair Professor till 2009. Then in 2010, by the syndicate resolution of University of Calcutta, the HODs in turn was the professor in charge of this Dr. Ambedkar Chair Professor, such as Professor Gopal Krishna Chakraborty, Dr. Sutapa Chaudhary, Professor Shubho Rai, and myself till November 2019 as Dr. Subroto Shankar Bakshi, appointed as Professor Ambedkar Chair in anthropology. By and large, the scheme of this chair, revised in 2011 by the Ministry of Social Justice and the Empowerment, Dr. Ambedkar Foundation, provided the objectives, particularly the subjects like economics, political science, religion, philosophy, constitutional studies, social work, human rights, as well as other disciplines considered relevant for the attainment of our national goal for social justice. In my opinion, all the subjects mentioned are well within the subject area and the research on anthropology. The research focus area as per the scheme of the foundation, our deprived section of the society, and research on the socio-economic and cultural life of the marginal people like scheduled castes and the scheduled tribes. The last Dr. Ambedkar Memorial Lecture was held on 6/12/2018, means 6 December 2018, to commemorate the death day of the Dr. Ambedkar, Baba Rao Ambedkar, which was December 6th, 1956. The lecture was delivered by Dr. Devi Chatterjee, former professor, international relations, Jadavpur University, on contesting marginality, the Ambedkar legacy, and beyond. With these few words, I cordially invite Professor Debashish Das, our Honorable Registrar, University of Calcutta, to inaugurate the occasion by saying few words. Professor Das, please.
Thank you, Professor. First of all, I would like to welcome all of you and very good afternoon. Under this COVID-19 situation, I wish all of you a good health. And on behalf of university, first of all, I would like to welcome Professor Nirmal Kanti Chakraborty, an eminent personality of our state and as country as well. And I feel myself honored and privileged to be in this webinar. And I am very much privileged myself in this way also, that I am attached with a very important webinar related to Baba Saheb Ambedkar, one of the greatest Indian India has ever produced. I may not be very well versed in this subject, not at all better to say, but as an educated Indian, I am indebted to him for giving us so beautiful written constitution. But to me, Professor, to me, Baba Saheb Ambedkar is the symbol of justice, symbol of wisdom. And in this webinar, I am very sure some new aspect will come out, which will help us to give to place our universities thinking in this pandemic situation, not only this pandemic situation, in this modern age, how the philosophy of Baba Saheb Ambedkar is still relevant. But one point is that, it is my personal opinion, is it that we are really following his philosophy, thoughts, etc., or we are really actually taking advantage or exploiting his thoughts in different way. So I am very sure some good thing will come out from this webinar, and I wish all the success of this webinar. Thank you, all of you. And I may leave this webinar after some time due to some other reasons. Please excuse me at that time. So please proceed. Professor Mukherjee, please.
Thank you so much. Our registrar has inaugurated this one, and we are very much privileged and honored. He has, despite of the busy schedule, he has come forward to inaugurate this one. So with this, may I request Professor Subrata Shankar Bagchi to initiate the details of Ambedkar Professor and introduce our speaker, Professor Nirmal Kanti Chakraborty. Professor Subrata Shankar Bagchi, please.
Well, before I start my introductory speech, bit of a housekeeping issues. I mean, I request all the participants to mute themselves so that there is no echo. I mean, the things that I request all the participants to mute themselves so that there is no echo.
Yes, this is also my request. All the participants, please mute yourself and your videos, please.
Well, Professor Debashish Das, Honorable Registrar, University of Calcutta, Professor Nirmal Kanti Chakraborty, Honorable Vice Chancellor, West Bengal National University of Juridical Sciences, and the speaker in the Dr. Ambedkar Memorial Lecture, Professor Arup Ratan Bandyopadhyay, Head Department of Anthropology, my other colleagues, students, scholars, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm well afternoon to all of you, and I sincerely hope that all of you are in good health and spirit during this difficult time. Normally we organize Ambedkar Memorial Lectures in the Department of Anthropology at the University of Calcutta, but welcome to this new normal where we engage ourselves more on virtual platforms. I shudder to think how Baba Saheb himself could react to this new normal. I guess.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Excuse me, sir.
Hello?
Sorry for the interruption, sir, but your voice is echoing. It is not clear at all.
Yeah, I can.
Excuse me, sir.
Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, I must mute all. I must mute all. Let me see.
Good afternoon, sir.
Hello.
Good afternoon, sir.
Professor Bakchi, you just carry on because I feel this is a echo of your own voice. So this is nothing doing with the other people are making it in unmute or mute. I feel that you should carry on. I feel sometimes later it will be all right. So might be a network issue, another kind of thing. Your voice is going to be echoed. So everybody, I feel I'm seeing through the participant, everybody has already muted the things. Might be there is network issue, but you should carry on. It's all right. You are audible. Thank you so much.
Sure. I mean, we are privileged to have Professor Nirmal Kanti Chakraborty, Honorable Vice Chancellor of the West Bengal National University of Juridical Sciences, who has kindly agreed to deliver the Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Memorial Lecture of this year. After graduating from the University of Calcutta, Professor Chakraborty did his LLB, MA, Political Science, and LLM, Tort and Crime from the University of Calcutta, and got his PhD from the University of Burdwan on probation system in the administration of criminal justice in West Bengal. Immediately after passing LLM in 1985, Professor Chakraborty joined in West Bengal Educational Service and posted as lecturer in law in Government of West Bengal, Hooghly Mohsin College. In 1996, he joined the University of Calcutta and retired as professor in the Department of Law in 2015. Professor Chakraborty also worked as a director, School of Law, KIIT University, Bhubaneswar from 2009 to 2019. Now he is working as a Vice Chancellor of West Bengal National University of Juridical Sciences since 3rd July 2019. As a prolific writer, Professor Chakraborty has so far authored eight books. He has also published more than 80 articles and research papers in various national and international journals. Professor Chakraborty has established himself as a researcher in the field of criminology and criminal justice in India. He has successfully guided 23 PhD scholars, mainly in the field of criminal law and criminal justice. He has completed 5 research projects and associated with 3 other projects of Ministry of Law and Justice, Food Foundation, World Justice Project, ABA, USA, UNDP, UGC, ICSSR, etc. In 2001, the Indian Society of Criminology conferred fellowship to Professor Chakraborty for his contribution in the field of criminology. In 2017, Professor Chakraborty has been awarded Professor K. Chokalingam Award by Indian Society of Victimology for his contribution to victimology in India. He was awarded research scholarship by Max Planck Institute of Foreign and International Criminal Law, Freiburg, Germany in 2017 and 18. Thank you. Over to Professor Banerjee, please. Bandyopadhyay, Professor Bandyopadhyay. Well, I guess Professor Bandyopadhyay has some network issues. So I would like to request Professor Chakraborty to deliver the Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Memorial Lecture. I guess Professor has some network issues. So I would like to request Professor Chakraborty to deliver Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Professor Nirmal Kanti Chakraborty.
Yes, there was some kind of network issue. I'm sorry, Professor Bakshi. It's going on. So definitely, just request Professor Chakraborty to deliver his Ambedkar Memorial Lecture. Right, Professor Chakraborty, please. Professor N.K. Chakraborty, are you there? Please unmute yourself, please, and also open your video. Professor Chakraborty, are you there? Please unmute your video and audio.
Is there anyone or there is a problem related to network? Would not care about anything.
Professor Chakraborty,
Well, I think Professor Chakraborty can straight away start his talk, because otherwise it will take some more time to resume the normal, connectivity. I think Professor Chakraborty should try to start his lecture.
Hello, am I audible now?
yes, you are audible.
Okay. So good afternoon, everybody. I am very much happy to deliver this Dr. Ambedkar Memorial Lecture, particularly the place, the Human Rights Center, where I was sometime delivered as guest lecture when I was in Department of Law, University of Calcutta. And I visited many times when I was there. Instead of webinar, I could have been very happy if it was the live in the department. But it is also a pleasure for me, and it is a happier moment for me to see some known faces, some colleagues in the department, and to deliver the lecture. As it is named under Dr. Ambedkar, I have chosen the title Ambedkar's Idea of Equality and Rights of Transgender Persons, which last few years and particularly even the legal regime recognized this issue in 2019, 5th December in our parliament, and also the legal regime started from January 2020. So I thought it is very much pertinent to have lecture on this issue, which is an emerging area of law and social science researchers and scholars. My lecture I have divided into 5 areas. First, I will contextualize my topic. The second, I will conceptualizing the transgender persons and their status at the present moment. Then I will visit the international instruments of human rights in connection with transgender persons, how we can put transgender persons in the international human rights jurisprudence. Then I will come to Ambedkar's idea of equality, particularly from his debates in the Constitutional Assembly. And lastly, I will come to the legislation which was passed by our parliament on 5th December 1919 and came into force on 10th January 2020. To contextualize, I will first introduce the early childhood of Ambedkar in his school days. He had to pass the discrimination in the school life itself when his age is just 7, 8, or at the beginning at the age of 6. When he was in school, he has no right to sit in the bench. He has to carry his seats from his home. In the classroom, he has no right to ask question to any teacher. He has no right to go to the teacher in front and to show the either book or his own plate or exercise book. Even to drink water, he has to wait for the mercy of others. So the boy who has faced discrimination from his very early childhood, agitated in mind, and got the opportunity to frame the country's constitution, the ground norm of our legal regime. I think that discrimination writ large in his speeches, how discrimination can be removed in our social life, in our political life, and also economic life. And his idea that our society is not free from discrimination still writ large in our society. In many respects, one of the aspects is also how the transgenders being treated in our society. Let me take some of the conspectus of or incidences just 1 or 2 years back in our country and also the other countries in the world. If we look into 2019 Pondicherry Kozhikode incident, where even few transgender person being murdered out of hatred. And this type of hatred we had noticed in newspaper, particularly in Hindu, in from 2000, read in the newspaper the harassment, discrimination, and the social injustice to transgenders traveling in the public places. National Human Rights Commission in its annual report 2018 also depicted the status, discrimination, tortures, harassment of transgenders in various places in the country. Even if we look into international scenario, in 2018, United Nations Assembly also in this resolution noticed and noted this status, harassment, discrimination against the transgender persons. In UK, it is reported that 2 out of 5 transgender persons have experienced hate crime or incidents of gender inequality in their life. In USA also, 2017 to 19, there are reports of transgender being abused, killed, or manhandled. So in this background, I think that if we look into and revisit our constitutional debates in 1950s, 49 and 50s, and the present law after 70 years by our parliament, I think that the Ambedkar's memorial lecture would be justified in this context. So let me conceptualize how we can look into transgenders in the present Indian as well as the international scenario. It is the binary identification of sexes and definitely legitimate and scientific. However, binary gender identification is not legitimate and undermines the right to be recognized as such, which is universal human right. As a consequence of such ignorance, what emerges is the denial of human treatment towards this marginalized community that most often than not is very little talked about. It is the transgender community. It is in fact scientifically proven that such a condition, if we term it as a condition, is not unnatural to humankind, but it is one of the exceptions that surely is natural. Scholars of transgender studies have time and again argumented that transgender activists across the world have been raising their voices against oppression and requesting equality and equal treatment for the community. But until lately, such efforts had not yielded much result. However, an ancient civilization like ours, dating back to at least 5,000 years, should not have fallen prey to such abhorrent acts of violence against a community that for this part of the world have remained spiritually pristine and commanded respected. This was the only community that in its collectivity had to power to bless. They are considered as God's men, God's women. Then what brought about the change? Just like most developments has been creation of colonial masters without citing it as an excuse. It was the Criminal Tribes Act 1870 that created this sea change in attitude of the people towards this much respected transgender community. This act sought to criminalize the existence of the community, and Jessica Hinchey, in her book Governing Gender and Sexuality in Colonial India, the Hijra, wrote that the fact of ensued was proof enough to the criminality and ensuring action against the transgender community. So mere assumptions were taken up as presumptions to conduct raids, arrest, prosecute, including stripping of their only modes of livelihood. This legal creation was dehumanizing, degrading, and propagated the idea of transgender community being lower than humans. Inequality thus was given way for. The problems faced by the community are interrelated socio-legal issues. Firstly, gender-based violence and legal mechanism in place for its redressal is understood in an extremely limited and narrower sense. The binary construct of gender, that is, understanding of personhood, identity from the gonadal perspective, is the root problem that has sparked inhuman activities towards other section of the community who identify beyond this restricted construction. Thus, there are problems in defining this community in itself. And secondly, the third gender in the community has not been recognized despite manifold efforts. The hatred towards them have led to commission of unthinkable atrocities against them. The violence is no more localized but has spread across the world. The international community and the governments have taken no initiative facilitating the mass atrocities and killings against the community. And finally, identifying the community as such as a group that is determinable and permanent is a difficult yet that strikes at the very core of the trans community existence. As mentioned earlier, India was definitely progressive on various counts, especially with regard to our indigenous human rights protection mechanism, which now is identified as cultural relativism. And such was the case with our constitutional drafting process. The drafters of the constitution attempted to redress the massive marginalization that was embedded in society and was a derivative of colonial administration. Recently, in an address in the ILS Law College, Pune, Justice Chandrachud opined that the Indian constitution is reflective of a century-long struggle for self-determination. The constitution embedded a transformative vision at its birth. The idea of self-determination is pivotal to the existence of the transgender community, whose gender identification is the crux of their existence. While the Constitution envisages the principle, the same remain infectious to the protection of their rights. But in 2014, a sigh of relief came with the Nalsa versus Union of India case and the judgment that utilized the same principle of self-determination to accord them the much awaited legal recognition. The question that requires vetting and answers pertains to the impact of effectuation of this landmark judgment, and therein we witness faint efforts being taken by the stakeholders. Even though some initiatives are being undertaken by the various state governments, the insufficiency in undoing the historical injustices lies vividly clear. Now, if we look into the positioning the transgender person and their rights under international human rights perspective, and we can connect it with Ambedkar's idea of equality in our constitution, which is being reflected in various judgments in our Supreme Court. While interpretation of the Constitution has undergone tremendous changes, especially in Part 3, Fundamental Rights chapter, the essence and spirit of this ground norm remains unaltered. Plethora of cases like Minerva Mills, Kesavananda Bharati to Puttoswamy, all are witnesses of same, and accordingly the spirit of fundamental rights for the transgender community remains intact and unaltered for the same is equally applicable to the all human beings, and are not the transgender community persons humans too? Indeed, there was no specific discussion on protecting rights of the transgender community and guaranteeing equality to them, but specific discussions on marginalization and marginalized communities seems equally relevant and applicable to the transgender population. The rule of statutory interpretation of causas omissas cannot be used here, and the NALSA judgment has negated this rule by reading the gender into sex under Article 15 and 16 of the Constitution. Similarly, external aids for interpretation through the Constitutional Assembly debates on equality, status, dignity, and life of the marginalized can be supplanted for the transgender community in its present context and relevance. Taking cue from Susan Ukin's pathbreaking work, Sex Rights, Women's Human Rights in Late 20th Century, One Step Forward, Two Step Back, integration of human rights with international law, and recognized women's rights as human rights. An Amnesty International report 1998 on gay rights are human rights led to scholars like Tia Powell and others to recognize and voice transgenders' rights are also human rights. So an integrated understanding of all these scholarly writings with the wisdom of Dr. Ambedkar shows the way for integrating the transgender community into society by conferring the dignified life and with right to equality before the law. Before delving into the rights that are equally applicable to transgender community from international and national perspective, we may look into the international instruments that recognize almost the seeds of this equality and equal rights of the all human being, including transgender persons. Thus, the different kinds of atrocities meted out make it amply clear there is an inherent discrimination and bias against the transgender community, whether in the form of discriminatory criminal laws, discriminatory treatment in offices, schools, homes, or discriminatory curbing of free speech, grossly violating the right to freedom from discrimination, as recognized in Article 1, 2, and 7 of Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and also Article 2 and 16 of International Covenants on Civil Political Rights. Additionally, they are not free from express themselves in their own way, violating the right of freedom of expression as guaranteed in Article 19 of Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This essentially curtails their right to liberty and security of persons as enshrined in Article 3 of Universal Declaration of Human Rights and Article 6 and 9 of International Covenant on Civil Political Rights. Furthermore, torture and inhuman treatment are essential elements of their existence that in all forms violate the 1987 Convention Against Torture and Article 5 of Universal Declaration of Human Rights and Article 7 of International Covenant on Civil Political Rights. India, despite being a non-member of the convention, is bound by the principal elements that have a bearing on these conventions, as that are pillars of human rights jurisprudence, which are very much the basic value of our constitution. Moreover, The convention is also believed to have attained the status of customary international law, and thus breach of the principle therein surely reflect upon liability emerging therefrom. Moreover, arbitrary arrest and detention, as enshrined in Article 9 of Universal Declaration of Human Rights and Article 9 of International Covenants on Civil Political Rights, are commonplace that snatch their rights to effective remedy, leaving them in the almost no man's land. Apart from these rights, human rights that are positive rights protected majorly under the International Convention on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights are regularly violated when access to housing, sanitation, adequate living, work, and security, among other responsibilities of the states, are denied to the transgender persons. With the national legislative framework in mind, such derogations of the rights of the transgender community members, Constitution of India, the foremost and primary repository of all human rights of human being in this country, is gravely affected. Part 3, dealing with fundamental rights, are almost in totality violated from the right to equality under Article 14 to 20, right to life and personal liberty, Article 21, 22, right against exploitation, Article 23 and 24, cultural and educational rights, Article 25 to 31. The only right per se available to the community members is the right of constitutional remedies as a result of violation of all mentioned fundamental rights. But the question is, how many of them finally end up approaching the apex court or Supreme Court? And more importantly, how many can approach the court itself? With this background, let me bring the Ambedkar's view as expressed in his speech in the Constitutional Assembly debates. Dr. Ambedkar laid a lot of stress on equality and fraternity throughout his deliberations. What we know as Part 3 of our Constitution, and same has been reflected more succinctly in the preamble that sets tone for the world's longest Constitution. To begin with, on 25th November 1949, Dr. Ambedkar says, "We must begin by acknowledging the fact that there is complete absence of two things in Indian society. One, of this equality. On the social plane, we have in India a society based on principle of graded inequality, which means elevation for some and degradation for others. On the economic plane, we have a society in which there are some who have immense wealth as against many who live in abject poverty. On the 26th January 1950, we are going to enter into a life of contradictions. In politics, we will have equality, and in social and economic life, we will have inequality. In politics, we will be recognizing principle of one man, one vote, and one vote, one value. But in our social and economic life, we shall, by reason of our social and economic structure, continue to deny the principle of one man, one value. How long shall we continue to live this life of contradictions? How long shall we continue to deny equality in our social and economic life? If we continue to deny it for long, we will do so only by putting our political democracy in peril. We must remove this contradiction at the earliest possible moment, or else those who suffer from inequality will blow up the structure of political democracy, which is assembly has no laboriously built up. India has not been a democracy only in the letters, but in its spirit. Political democracy that was envisaged aligned with social democracy by negation of any hierarchical structure that Ambedkar speaks of in this way. The contradiction that he was fearful of his equally relevant to the transgender person, who even after the Nalsa judgment is rejected and ostracized in the society as explained above. Earlier, the contradiction was itself the negation of their existence as such, which even after being legally warranted, fails where even though they are recognized as human beings, the equal status is not being available. The foremost of its being the lack of reservation policies to ensure adherence to equality of opportunity for the long deprived transgender persons and accordingly denial of equality of outcome. So in this background, our parliament introduced a legislation known as the Transgender Person Protection of Rights Act 2019, and it was gazetted on December 5, 2019 and came into force in January 2020. It has explained and has a definition of transgender persons. It defined transgender persons like this. A transgender person means a person whose gender does not match with the gender assigned to that person at birth and includes trans man or trans woman, whether or not such person has undergone sex reassignment surgery or hormone therapy or laser therapy or such other therapy. Person with intersex variations, genderqueer, and person having such sociocultural identities as Kinnar, Hijira, Arabani, and Jokta. In this
Dr. Professor Chakraborty, you are not audible. You have muted yourself.
now,
Yeah, sure. It's audible. Perfect.
so there are 5 more chapters like prohibition against discrimination, then recognition of identity as transgender person through the mechanism of district magistrate. There are some measures to be taken by the government as of obligations, obligation of establishment on other persons, and there is education, social security, health or transgender persons, National Council for Transgender Persons, and one important more chapters, offenses and penalties, and the last chapter on rule making chapter. Now the question is how this law can be critically evaluated and whether this law is sufficient to make the status of transgender persons improved as envisaged in the preamble of this act. If we look into new legislation under various provisions like Section 8 on welfare scheme to 15 healthcare benefits, all are superfluously laid down as mere replication of the human rights principle that are toothless like our Human Rights Protection Act. In fact, towards criminalizing the acts that are undeniably inhuman, equal treatment is denied. Section 18 providing for penalties and offenses, also a questionable provision. Thus, while literal interpretation of the act portrays the apparent equality principle therein, it would not be wrong to assume that the legislators do not intend much to effectuate the provisions, since the same lack vigor and draft rules 2020 also have not been any help to improve their status. What Dr. Ambedkar was skeptical of might actually unfold when patience of the transgender community and activists will break up in for massive revolutions that might end up blowing up the system for the present situation. While most of the discussion on Article 15 or Article 14 evolved around the minorities that were identified as caste-based minority primarily because of situation prevalent then, alongside voices of the transgender community not being represented and being quite feeble. Therefore, the essence of discussion on marginalized group hold appropriate ground for even the socially backward and marginalized transgender community as well. And the attempt now should be in acknowledging that same status with unfortunately has been ignored for the community. This shall assure is equality of outcome that the community is desirous, as Dr. Ambedkar in his speech in the Constitutional Assembly expressed. The social inequality exists in at that time, and it is still now continuing. He says we must make our political democracy a social democracy as well. Political democracy cannot last unless there lies at base of its social democracy. What does social democracy mean? It means a way of life which recognizes liberty, equality, fraternity as the principle of life. This principle of liberty, equality, and fraternity as the principle of life. This principle of liberty, equality, and fraternity are not to be treated as separate item in the Trinity. They form a union of Trinity in the sense that to divorce one from the other is to defeat the very purpose of democracy. Liberty cannot be divorced from equality. Equality cannot be divorced from liberty. Nor can liberty and equality be divorced from fraternity. Without equality, liberty would produce the supremacy of few over many. Equality without liberty would kill individual initiative. Without fraternity, liberty would produce the supremacy of few over the many. Equality without liberty would kill individual initiative. Without fraternity, liberty and equality could not become a natural course of thing. It would require a constable to enforce them. It was said by Ambedkar on the same date, 25th November, in the Constitutional Assembly. Therefore, the unfortunate reality is that the binary gender conformity is so much ingrained into the system and the set mind of the governing structure that amid such contradictions, the essence of transgender persons, after all human beings, is lost. In this sense, thus collapsing the difference between gender and sex as the Pricewaterhouse versus Hopkins judgment on predetermination of sex seems logical by trying to reduce both this notion to biological elements connected with each other, thereby reducing complications as such, and maybe reading into sex and gender identity as inseparable. But whether it ultimately will or not is a question that casts a doubt because lot depends on social construction and deconstruction. However, it is certain that unless we take up the step to change the situation, we will not be able to change the status of this deprived and discriminated community. In the words of Dr. Ambedkar, I quote, there is great danger of things going wrong. Times are fast changing. People, including our own, are being moved by new ideologies. They are getting tired of government by the people. They are prepared to have government for the people and are indifferent whether it is government of the people and by the people. If we wish to preserve the constitution in which we have sought to enshrine the principle of government of people for the people and by the people. Let us resolve not to be tardy in the recognition of the evils that lie across our path and which induce people to prefer government for the people to government by the people, not to be weak in our initiative to remove them. That is the only way to serve the country. I know of no better. The question, therefore, that is thought-provoking while weighing the threshold of equality and principle of dignified human treatment arising therefrom, whether at all in India can claim to have achieved the truest form of democracy as envisaged by the father of Indian Constitution. While it is not uncommon to debate over the concept of freedom and whether liberty and freedom have been ensured in post-independent India and whether poverty has been or not removed successfully, discussions of equality might also be debatable and discussed by the society now. And there should be deliberation on social equality as a facet of political democracy, and democracy as such hardly captures the limelight. Since social democracy takes a back seat, the concern lies herein for transgender community because equality, while might seemingly be seen to be done, hierarchical structure as Ambedkar portrayed remains and thus equality unachieved. For the transgender community, it is not the hierarchical structure of caste system that pervades the social edifice, but it is connected with bedrock of their existence, their gender identity through self-determination, paving way for personal autonomy, the most vital right to life under Article 21 of the Constitution. This being connected with heteronormativity and bigenderism, majority identity over the non-bigenerated minority identity, and the resulted ostracization. This power of dynamics is reflected even in the attitude of the central government and state government in the formulation of the laws, policies, and schemes. Unless this inclusion is effectuated, social democracy is far from being realized, and if it is such, then the aura about the world's largest democracy only remains a facade, coloring the minds of the legislators, executive, and the mango people. Equality thus cannot be said to be done. It is a work in progress, but progress that is far behind the time and needs. So what I will conclude that in spite of all these legislations, it requires some structure, social structure. Any law to be implemented properly, we need three things. One is infrastructure, second is social structure, and third is legal structure. We have now the legal structure and to some extent our institutional structure, but unless social structure being changed, change in the mindset, change in the government policies and measures, equality, as Ambedkar also pointed out in the Constitutional Assembly 70 years back, that unless social equality you achieve, you can't guarantee by law make the equality before law a realization in the life. So it is not the rule of law, but rule of life that is very much needed even today in perspective of rights of the transgenders. I conclude with this, and if any further clarifications needed, my email ID is given to department and organizers. Anyone can share their question and thoughts. I will be glad to answer. Thank you all for giving patient hearing and giving me opportunity to hear this and to show you my face and to deliver this lecture. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Chakraborty. for this wonderful lecture. Actually, I would like to say two things. First is that those who want to have a certificate for this lecture can submit the feedback form, fill and submit the feedback form, and they will get the certificate. Second is that we have with us our head now, Professor Arubratan Bandyopadhyay. He has some network issues. I would like to request Dr. Shubhamoy Kisku to give us the vote of thanks. Shubhamoy, you are not audible. Just unmute yourself.
Well, thank you, Professor Bakchi. Good afternoon, all. Honorable Speaker, Honorable Registrar, University of Calcutta, Honorable Deputy Registrar, University of Calcutta, my dear colleagues, other dignitaries and distinguished guests, my dear friends, scholars and students. I am really thankful to the Departmental Committee of Anthropology, University of Calcutta for giving me the opportunity to express my vote of thanks on this special occasion. It is the biggest day in the history of our department. Today we have hosted our first webinar in memory of Dr. Bhimrao Ramjit Ambedkar. I hope we will have the opportunity to meet on similar more occasion in the near future. More than 100 participants have participated in this special academic lecture. This is a huge success in itself. On behalf of the University of Calcutta and the Department of Anthropology, I express my heartfelt thanks to our speaker, Professor Nirmal Kanti Chakraborty, Honorable Vice Chancellor, WB National University of Juridical Sciences, Kolkata, India. This program would not have possible if he had not been here with us. Thank you, sir, for your thought-provoking deliberation. I would like to convey sincere gratitude to our Honorable Registrar, University of Calcutta, Professor Devashish Das, for taking the time out of his busy schedule to inaugurate the program. Without his cooperation, this program would not have been possible. Thank you very much, sir. I would also like to convey sincere gratitude to our Honorable Deputy Registrar, University of Calcutta, Dr. Dipendu Chatterjee, for his all kind of support. I would like to thank our HOD, Department of Anthropology, University of Calcutta, Professor Arubratan Bandyopadhyay, for taking care of all the formalities related to this lecture and for the welcome address. Thank you, sir. I would also like to thank Professor Subrata Shankar Bakchi, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Chair Professor in Anthropology, University of Calcutta, for taking all the pain to organize such fantastic memorial lecture in the name of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Thank you once again for introducing the speaker. I would like to express gratefulness to our esteemed colleagues for their active cooperation. I would like to thank all the respected dignitaries and distinguished guests who have honored us with their presence. I would like to thank the organizing team, Kolkata Study Circle, a group of students and scholars from the discipline like anthropology, archaeology, law, sociology, and zoology. Without their active support, this lecture would not have been possible. I once again thank the authority, University of Calcutta. Thanks once again for making this memorial lecture a success. Last but not the least, I thank to our scholars and students for participating in this memorial lecture. Thank you all. Thanks. Over to you, Professor Bakchi.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
Bandyopadhyay, any closing words?
No, whether Banerjee is there.
Yes, at last I could enter. The host has locks for some time because a lot of people are coming and going. So he did a right thing. So he actually closed the door that we do in the classes anyway. So thank you so much. I mean, Professor Chakraborty, I did not listen for a many long time from you, and also unfortunately could not listen the whole part. But the one part I got, this is very interesting, and I'd like to ask you. Might be the participants has lot more questions. So shall I give your email ID to contact you?
Yes,
So that
yes.
is all of your consent. That if you give,
Yes.
so I can send this email, your email ID by the chat box.
I will welcome.
Okay,
welcome.
thank you so much. But your say just what I have just listened for some time. It was really very interesting because of the fact that the transgenders are really not unnatural. because we think the natural which is prevalent and the frequent. So transgenders are there from the evolutionary part. If you go to the plant animal, there are transgenders. So why not in case of the human? But this is biologically, culturally, and psychologically, there is lots of connotations. So this is again a open up questions in the inter and multidisciplinary aspects and also the counseling of that. So thank you so much. And you have enlightened us about this constitution, what the Indian government has given. So I could not listen, but I feel that I can see it again in the YouTube that has been.
I also first time enter into this area. This is also not my area, but I ventured this for the anthropology department only.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. You are a good friend of ours for a long time.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Professor Chakraborty. So with your all consent, I am putting your email ID in the chat box so that the participant can readily contact you for any kind of questions, and if they would like to expand their ideas.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much, Professor Chakraborty.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Professor Bagchi, please end note. Professor Bagchi, please end note.
Meeting ends here. Thank you all for participating in this fascinating talk. And I would like to request Professor Bandyopadhyay to actually give the email address of Professor Chakraborty in the chat box. So before it ends, it needs you need to put it in the chat box. Okay. Thank you, Professor Chakraborty. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Hello.
Thank you all. I have put down in the chat box. Professor Bagchi, you can check it in the chat box that I have given the email ID of Professor Chakraborty.
The participants can see it.
Okay, so I would again request the participant to take this one, and if you have any kind of clarification, observations, and any sharing of thoughts, or would like to understand from Professor Chakraborty, is a very good teacher and very compassionate teacher. So thank you so much. Shall I leave Professor Bagchi from the meeting?
Sure.
Thank you so much for everything.
I'm keeping it open for a while so that the participants can see the.
Okay, you do that. Okay.